Between the mighty Tigris and Euphrates, where layers of fertile silt have sustained life for millennia, a great story began. Not a legend, but the truth of a people who wrote the very first chapters of human history. The Sumerians, those who turned barren land into the Eden of the ancient world. They built the first cities, carved writing into clay, forged the wheel, and laid down the earliest codes of law. Yet here, ambition and the hunger for power ignited endless wars, and slowly, the shadows consumed their shining glory. From the towering heights of ziggurats reaching for the heavens to the crumbling walls beneath the hooves of invading armies, the journey of the Sumerians is a saga both glorious and tragic. And today, we return to Mesopotamia to witness their most triumphant moments and their final silent fall. Get ready, because in Chapter 1, we will stand at the very cradle of civilization, where the Sumerians began their epic journey. If you love history told with cinematic drama and emotion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This journey has only just begun. The camera glides above an endless plain, bathed in the first light of dawn. Two ribbons of silver-blue water wind across the landscape, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mist rises from their banks, curling over fields of green and gold. In the distance, dark figures move along the river's edge, carrying baskets, leading animals, and shaping the mud with bare hands. The air is quiet, except for the soft rush of water and the calls of birds beginning their day. This is southern Mesopotamia, around 4500 BCE. Long before empires, long before kings, before the written word itself. In most of the known world, people still live in scattered villages, bound to the cycles of hunting, gathering, and small-scale farming. But here, something different is stirring. Here, humanity is about to take its first great leap into organized civilization. It will be the Sumerians who make that leap. Not as a single unified kingdom, but as a network of ambitious city-states, each an island of human ingenuity in a sea of fertile land. Uruk, Eridu, Ur, Lagash. Their names, once fresh in the air, will survive for thousands of years, etched into clay tablets and whispered across history. The secret to their rise begins with the land itself. Each spring, snowmelt from distant mountains swells the rivers beyond their banks. The floodwaters spread over the plains, retreating only after they have left behind a dense, dark layer of silt. This silt is nature's gift, a deposit of minerals that turns the earth into one of the most fertile regions on the planet. Where others struggle against scarcity, the Sumerians are blessed with abundance. But abundance alone does not build cities. It must be controlled. The Sumerians dig canals to guide the floodwaters, turning seasonal chaos into predictable irrigation. They carve channels into the earth with wooden tools, line them with reeds, and connect them to an intricate web of fields. Barley waves under the breeze, wheat bends heavy with grain. Date palms flourish along the banks, their fruits sweet and sustaining. For the first time, people here can grow more food than they consume. With surplus comes stability. With stability comes specialization. Farmers can feed not just themselves, but potters, weavers, priests, and craftsmen. Trade begins. Clay is shaped into jars for storing grain and beer. Copper is hammered into tools and weapons. And as goods move from hand to hand, the need for record-keeping grows. Soon, the first marks appear on soft clay tablets, simple symbols pressed with reed styluses, the earliest whispers of writing. It's a bit like a match of Age of Empires II, where a civilization starts with a strong economy. In the game, the Sumerians are resilient, able to sustain growth over time. In reality, the pattern is the same. Strong food production leads to population growth, which fuels construction, trade, and defense. But, as any player knows, prosperity draws attention, and attention invites conflict. From above, the plain is alive with human effort. Men and women wade into irrigation channels, clearing silt. Fishermen cast nets from reed boats. Shepherds lead flocks along dusty paths toward fresh grazing land. Children laugh and chase each other between low, mud-brick homes. At the center of each settlement rises a temple mound, the earliest form of a ziggurat, a sacred place, both spiritual and practical. It is here that priests store grain, oversee rituals, and mediate disputes. Religion and governance are intertwined from the very beginning. Yet this paradise is not without challenges. The rivers that give life can also take it away. A flood that comes too early or too late can ruin crops. In dry years, the canals shrink to muddy trickles. Farmers learn to watch the skies, to read the patterns of water and wind, and to adapt their labor to the rhythm of the land. It is a fragile balance, one that requires cooperation within the community. Cooperation, however, is not the same as unity. As villages grow into towns and towns into city-states, competition emerges. Water rights become a matter of survival. Disputes over canals can ignite lasting feuds. Each settlement begins to guard its boundaries. Spears are sharpened. Watchtowers rise at the edges of cultivated land. The seeds of future conflict are already in the soil. Still, in these early centuries, the dominant feeling is one of possibility. Humanity has crossed a threshold. Life is no longer a struggle against the whims of nature alone. It is a dialogue with it, a shaping of the environment to human needs. The Sumerians are not just living in the world, they are remaking it. Imagine standing here on the banks of the Euphrates as the sun climbs higher. You hear the slap of wet clay bricks being stacked into a new wall. You smell the smoke of cooking fires and the tang of fresh-cut reeds. You see the temple rising above the town like a promise to the gods. This is the beginning, the first heartbeat of something that will outlast its makers. In time, these settlements will grow into cities unlike anything the world has seen. They will invent new tools, new ways of governing, new forms of art and architecture. They will trade with lands far beyond the horizon. They will build walls so high and temples so grand that strangers will travel for days just to gaze upon them. But that is yet to come. For now, the rivers flow on, carrying with them the lifeblood of a civilization still in its infancy. The people of Sumer walk their fields, tend their herds, and dream of what lies ahead. And far to the north, in a place called Uruk, something even greater is taking shape. A city that will redefine what it means to be human. The camera slowly pulls away from the fields, rising until the rivers stretch like silver veins across the green and gold earth. The narrator's voice lowers to a murmur, almost as if speaking directly to the viewer. Next, we step through the gates of Uruk, into the heart of the world's first great city, where stone, clay, and human ambition will forge the future. The shot opens on a wall, not a mere fence or mud embankment, but a colossal barrier of whitewashed bricks, gleaming under the Mesopotamian sun. It stretches far beyond the horizon, its shadow cutting across the desert floor. On the other side lies a city alive with motion, sound, and ambition. This is Uruk, around 3100 BCE, the beating heart of Sumer, and the greatest city the world has ever seen. Some call it the New York of the Stone Age, a place where life moves faster. Trade flows richer, and the ambitions of humanity stretch higher than ever before. Within its walls live tens of thousands, a population so large it dwarfs most settlements of its age. And unlike the simple farming villages scattered across the plains, Uruk is not just a place to live. It is a machine, a living, breathing system built for production, worship, governance, and power. From the city gates, the streets branch outward like veins, carrying the pulse of daily life. Merchants shout in crowded markets, offering copper blades, dyed wool, and jars of date wine. Donkeys bray under the weight of goods, their hooves clopping on sun-baked streets. Children weave between the stalls, darting around elders who pause to bargain over grain. The air is thick with the scent of baking bread, hot clay, and the faint perfume of imported oils. At the city's heart rises the ziggurat of Inanna, goddess of love, war, and fertility. This is no mere shrine, but a towering monument of mud brick, tier upon tier, painted in vibrant colors. Its steps rise toward the heavens as if to bridge the distance between mortals and gods. From the ziggurat's summit, priests watch over the city, their eyes scanning both the streets below and the distant horizon. In Uruk, religion is not separate from life. It is the center around which all else turns. Yet Uruk's power is not built on temples alone. It is a cradle of invention. Here, cuneiform writing flourishes, small wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay tablets. What began as simple tallies of grain now records laws, hymns, and trade agreements. In workshops, the wheel revolutionizes pottery making and transportation alike. With wheeled carts, merchants can move heavier loads farther and faster, linking Uruk to distant lands. This is a city that not only consumes resources, it generates influence. The scale of organization is staggering for its time. Labor is divided with precision. Farmers work the surrounding fields, their harvest stored in temple granaries. Craftsmen fashion tools, textiles, and ornaments. Scribes keep meticulous records. Soldiers guard the gates and patrol the walls. Every role is part of a larger system, one that allows Uruk to thrive far beyond the capabilities of any village. If you've ever played Age of Empires II, you might recognize the Sumerians' strength here. In-game, they are known for a powerful Vagurinaim, steady economy, and the ability to sustain long-term development. In reality, Uruk embodies that same trait. An economy robust enough to fuel monumental architecture, advanced technology, and a standing military. But as in the game, this reliance on a strong economy has a double edge. One disruption, and the machine can grind to a halt. Uruk's wealth rests on the stability of its agricultural base. The city depends on the fertile plains around it, fed by the careful management of irrigation canals. But nature is not always kind. A bad flood, a drought, or a shift in the river's course can cripple food production. When that happens, the markets fall silent, the granaries empty, and the once bustling streets echo with unrest. Still, in these days of prosperity, the city feels invincible. Caravans arrive from distant lands, bringing lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, and metals from Anatolia. Uruk's influence spreads not only through trade, but through culture. Neighboring cities adopt its architectural styles, its religious practices, even its methods of governance. In many ways, Uruk is not just a city. It is a template for civilization. From above, it is a sight to behold. The great walls encircle an orderly maze of streets and courtyards. The ziggurat rises like a stairway to the gods. The canals shimmer with the reflection of the midday sun. Beyond the walls, green fields stretch toward the horizon, dotted with workers tending their crops. It is here, in this single city, that humanity has taken its first confident stride into urban life. But not all look upon Uruk with admiration. To some, its wealth is an invitation. Rivals watch from beyond the plains, calculating the strength of its gates and the discipline of its soldiers. Inside, political factions whisper in temple halls, each seeking a greater share of power. The larger the city grows, the more complex and fragile its balance becomes. Uruk's story is one of dazzling achievement, but also of vulnerability. Its greatness lies in its ability to organize, to coordinate the efforts of thousands toward a shared vision. Yet that same complexity is its weakness. A system that can be shaken by famine, flood, or war. Still, as the sun sets over the city and the ziggurat's shadow stretches long across the streets, there is no sense of decline. The people of Uruk believe they are building something eternal, and perhaps they are. For even when its walls crumble, the idea of Uruk will live on in the cities that follow. The camera lingers on the ziggurat, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Drums echo faintly in the distance, a rhythm that could be either celebration or the first beat of war. The narrator's tone deepens, pulling the audience forward. In the next chapter, we will meet the kings who walked these streets, men whose names are carved into legend. One will rise above them all, a warrior, a builder, and a figure whose story will echo for thousands of years: Gilgamesh. The ziggurat still glows under the last rays of the setting sun. The city's heartbeat slows as market stalls close and torches flicker to life along the streets. But in the palace of Uruk, a figure stands upon the balcony, gazing toward the horizon. A man whose name will echo through eternity: Gilgamesh. To the people of Uruk, he is more than a king. He is the shepherd of his city, a warrior who leads from the front, and a builder whose projects reach toward the heavens. To history, he is the earliest ruler whose deeds are etched into both stone and myth. And to legend, he is a demigod, 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, whose life becomes the foundation of the world's first great epic. We do not know how much of the Epic of Gilgamesh reflects the man himself, but we know this: Gilgamesh ruled a powerful Uruk during a turbulent time. Neighboring city-states like Kish, Lagash, and Umma eyed Uruk's wealth and influence with envy. Each city had its own ruler, its own gods, and its own ambitions. And in Mesopotamia, ambition often led to war. One of the most famous conflicts of Gilgamesh's reign was with the city of Kish. The cause, as with many wars, was a mix of pride, power, and politics. Kish's ruler, seeking dominance over the region, challenged Uruk's sovereignty. To submit would be unthinkable for Uruk's king and for its people. The scene shifts to the battlefield. The sun rises over the plain, casting long shadows across the assembled armies. Uruk's soldiers stand in tight formation, shields interlocked, spears angled toward the enemy. They wear leather armor reinforced with copper plates, their helmets gleaming in the morning light. Behind them, the standard of Uruk, a tall pole topped with the emblem of the goddess Inanna, flutters in the breeze. On the other side, Kish's army waits. The tension is palpable. For a moment, there is silence, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Then, the war drums begin. The ground shakes as Kish's front line advances. Uruk's soldiers hold steady, their discipline unbroken. At Gilgamesh's signal, the first rank of spearmen thrust forward, the second rank stepping into place behind them. The clash of bronze on bronze rings out like thunder. The air fills with shouts, the whistle of javelins, and the raw, chaotic sound of combat. Gilgamesh himself rides a chariot at the flank, a rare luxury in an age when cavalry is scarce and horses are small, more suited for pulling than for charging. He wields a massive axe, its blade catching the light with each swing. Wherever his chariot wheels carve through the dust, Kish's soldiers falter. The Sumerian military strength lies not in shock cavalry or swift maneuvers, but in its disciplined infantry. Long spears keep enemies at a distance, while shield walls hold the line against the push of enemy forces. Their formations are designed for endurance, to grind down the opponent through cohesion and attrition. This methodical approach is mirrored, in a way, by their depiction in Age of Empires: The Coup, where the Sumerians are economically strong and built for sustained campaigns rather than quick, overwhelming strikes. Yet in this battle, discipline alone is not enough. Kish presses hard, sending waves of infantry into Uruk's lines. The fighting is brutal and personal, spear points scraping against shields, soldiers locking eyes over the rim before one lunges and the other falls. The dust rises so thick it dims the sun, turning the battlefield into a hazy, copper-tinted storm. Gilgamesh's voice cuts through the chaos. His orders are clear, commanding, and impossible to ignore. Slowly, Uruk's lines push forward. Step by step, the warriors reclaim ground until Kish's forces begin to falter. When the break comes, it is sudden. A gap opens in their line. Uruk's spearmen surge through, and the enemy's will to fight crumbles. By the day's end, the plain belongs to Uruk. The dead are many, and the wounded fill the makeshift tents that serve as field hospitals. But for now, the city is safe. Gilgamesh has secured his place not only as king, but as champion. Yet even in victory, there is an undercurrent of unease. The Sumerians have learned that no wall is high enough, no army large enough to guarantee peace. Each battle won plants the seeds for the next conflict. Each victory invites the jealousy of rivals. And though Gilgamesh's reign is strong, he cannot fight time itself. As night falls, the fires of the camp burn low. Gilgamesh walks among his men, speaking to them not as a distant ruler, but as a fellow warrior. He knows their names, their families, their sacrifices. In this, perhaps, lies his greatest strength, the ability to bind his people together, not just through law or fear, but through shared purpose. But legends have a way of outgrowing the truth. In time, the man will be remembered more for his mythical journeys, his quest for immortality, his friendship with Enkidu, his defiance of the gods, than for the political and military reality of his reign. And yet, the shadow he casts over Uruk will shape the city for generations. The camera lingers on the battlefield at dawn, the bodies of the fallen shrouded in mist. A slow, mournful flute plays in the background. The narrator's voice lowers. Even kings of legend cannot hold back the tide of time. And for the Sumerians, the next challenge would not come from a single city, but from the changing face of war itself. In the next chapter, we will step inside the armories of Sumer to uncover the weapons, tactics, and strategies that allowed them to hold their place in history, and the limitations that would one day cost them everything. The dawn breaks not over fields of wheat, but over the cold steel and leather of an army preparing for war. On the packed earth outside Ur's massive city walls, soldiers assemble in tight ranks. The air smells of oiled bronze, fresh-cut wood, and dust stirred by hundreds of feet. Banners snap in the breeze, each marked with the sigil of a Sumerian god. Inanna for Uruk, Nana for Ur, Enlil for Nippur. And in the center, a sound begins, the slow, steady beat of war drums. The Sumerians are not a people who rush into battle without preparation. War, for them, is as much engineering as it is courage. Every soldier has his place, every unit a role. At the front, spear infantry stand shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, creating a living wall of wood, leather, and bronze. Behind them, archers knock arrows to taut bowstrings, their eyes scanning the horizon. And rumbling along the flanks, the pride of the Sumerian army, heavy four-wheeled war carts. These carts, drawn not by horses but by sturdy onagers and mules, are primitive compared to later chariots. But in their time, they are instruments of terror. Each cart carries a driver and a warrior armed with javelins or spears. On the flat plains of Mesopotamia, they thunder forward, their wheels kicking up curtains of dust, smashing into enemy formations with raw momentum. But they are also heavy, slow to turn, and best suited for open terrain, a fact that their enemies will one day exploit. It is this combination of solid infantry, disciplined archery, and heavy carts that defines Sumerian battlefield strategy. Their strength lies in formation, in holding ground, in grinding the enemy down rather than outpacing them. In a way, it mirrors their depiction in Age of Empires 2. The Sumerian civilization excels in enduring ranged firepower, powerful siege capabilities, and economic staying power, but struggles when faced with fast, mobile cavalry raids. And siege is where the Sumerians truly shine. The scene shifts to the outskirts of Ur during a legendary siege. The city's walls rise high, built from baked brick, their towers casting long shadows across the land. Outside, an enemy coalition is gathered, their campfires burning through the night like a necklace of orange stars around the city. Siege engines, crude battering rams and wheeled towers, stand ready, their wooden frames reinforced with hides soaked in water to resist fire. Inside Ur, the defenders prepare. Archers take their positions atop the battlements, their quivers brimming with arrows. At their feet, jars of oil and baskets of stones stand ready to be hurled down on attackers. Spearmen guard the gates, their faces set in grim determination. Then, at the first light of dawn, the drums begin. Slow at first, then faster, until the very air seems to vibrate. The enemy surges forward, ladders scraping against the walls, shields raised against the rain of arrows. The sound is overwhelming. The deep boom of drums, the clash of metal, the sharp cries of the wounded. The Sumerian defenders unleash their counterattack. Archers fire in disciplined volleys, their arrows darkening the sky before falling in deadly arcs. From the war cart stationed just inside the gates, crews launch javelins at any attacker who breaches the outer defenses. And then come the counter-siege tactics. Sappers digging out from the inside to collapse enemy siege towers. Boiling oil poured from above, and gates flung open for sudden, brutal sorties. For hours, the battle sways back and forth. The attackers make gains only to be pushed back by disciplined spear charges. The defenders bleed, but their lines hold. This is the essence of Sumerian warfare, a test of endurance where victory belongs not to the swift, but to the side that refuses to break. Yet endurance has its limits. Against nomadic enemies, swift horsemen from the steppes or desert raiders on nimble mounts, Sumerian armies are less effective. Their war carts cannot match the speed of light cavalry, and their heavy infantry struggles to respond to hit-and-run tactics. It is this weakness that will one day erode the dominance of the city-states. As faster, more mobile foes learn to strike where the Sumerians are least able to respond. Still, within the confines of a set-piece battle or a siege, the Sumerian war machine is formidable. Their strategy is built not just on the strength of arms, but on the unity of their people. In the workshops of Uruk and Lagash, smiths hammer out bronze spearheads and arrow tips. In the granaries, farmers supply grain to feed the garrisons. Even the temples play their part, blessing the troops and legitimizing the war in the eyes of the gods. As the siege of Ur nears its climax, the enemy's final assault begins. The battering ram crashes against the gate again and again, each blow shaking the wall. Then, with a splintering crack, the outer gate falls. Enemy soldiers pour into the courtyard and are met by a wall of Sumerian spearmen, their points glinting in the morning sun. The clash is thunderous, the fighting hand to hand, brutal and desperate. At last, the enemy breaks. Those who can flee, flee. The rest are cut down where they stand. The city has endured another siege, another test of its strength and discipline. But the cost is high, and the defenders know the truth. There will always be another enemy, another siege, another trial by fire. As the smoke of burning siege engines drifts into the sky, the narrator's voice cuts through the haze. Every city in Sumer could defend itself, but every city also sought to conquer. And when every wall hides both a market and a garrison, war becomes inevitable. In the next chapter, we will step away from a single city and witness the full tapestry of Mesopotamian conflict, the endless wars between city-states, where alliances shift like sand and no ruler's crown is secure for long. The land between the rivers has never been quiet. From the moment the first city walls rose from the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, their shadows fell not just on fields of barley and wheat, but on the ambitions of their rulers. Every harvest, every well, every stretch of irrigated land became something worth fighting for. And the Sumerians fought often. The city-states, Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Kish, Ur, and others, were like glittering islands in a sea of wilderness. Each one ruled by its own king-priest, each claiming divine favor from a different patron god, each convinced of its right to dominate its neighbors. The rivers that nourished them also divided them, and the canals that brought life to the fields could just as easily be turned into weapons, flooded to drown enemy crops or drained to starve a rival city. At the heart of these conflicts was the same resource that had allowed Sumer to flourish: water. In a land where rain was rare and the lifeblood of the people flowed only through carefully managed irrigation, the control of canals meant the control of survival itself. And so began the centuries-long pattern: city rising against city, walls clashing against walls. The story of Uruk, Lagash, and Umma is perhaps the most famous of these rivalries. Imagine a vast, sun-baked plain shimmering under the heat, where armies march under banners painted with the sigils of their gods. Uruk, proud and ancient, boasts walls built by Gilgamesh himself, or so its people claim. Lagash, rich from trade and fierce in its defense, stands ready with a disciplined army. Umma, ambitious and restless, hungers for the fertile Guadana plain, a stretch of land so rich that its soil seems to breathe life into every seed. The political maneuvering between these cities is as tense as any modern thriller. Treaties are signed, then broken. Envoys are welcomed one day and insulted the next. Spies slip through city gates under cover of night, carrying stolen plans or false promises. Every alliance is temporary, every truce a pause to sharpen swords. In one particularly bitter episode, Lagash and Umma enter into a treaty to share irrigation rights. For a season, peace holds. Farmers from both cities work side by side, digging new canals, tending the same fields. But when the waters run low the next summer, accusations fly. Umma accuses Lagash of diverting too much water upstream. Lagash claims Umma's farmers are stealing grain. Skirmishes erupt along the canal banks, each one bloodier than the last. Soon, these small clashes grow into full battles, with hundreds of soldiers clashing in the open plains, the sound of bronze on bronze echoing for miles. Inside the walls of Uruk, the rulers watch with interest. A weakened Lagash and Umma mean an opportunity for expansion. Armies are readied not to defend, but to strike at the moment when both rivals are too exhausted to resist. In this way, the Sumerian city-states become locked in a cycle of war, each trying to grow stronger by making the others weaker. This is where the Sumerians' greatest strength, their ability to organize complex societies, becomes their weakness. Each city is a marvel of administration. Temples managing vast grain stores, scribes recording every transaction in cuneiform tablets, soldiers drilled into disciplined formations. But all of this is aimed inward, toward the glory of one city, not the unity of the whole land. There is no lasting coalition, no federation to stand against external threats. In Age of Empires terms, it's as if each player is pouring resources into their own wonder while sabotaging the others, never realizing that an outside opponent is quietly building an unstoppable army. The emotional cost of this constant warfare is heavy. Imagine being a farmer in Umma. One season your fields are burned by Lagash, the next you are conscripted into Umma's army to raid those same fields in revenge. Families are divided as relatives marry across city lines. Trade suffers as merchants are robbed or killed on the roads between cities. Even in victory, the spoils are bitter, for the next war is always coming. One legendary battle brings the tragedy of this era into focus. Lagash, desperate to break Umma's hold on a disputed stretch of land, launches an all-out assault. The armies meet in the Guadena plain at dawn. The ground trembles with the rumble of war carts, the air fills with the hiss of arrows, and the sun rises over a haze of dust and blood. At midday, Lagash gains the upper hand, pushing Umma's troops back toward their city walls. But instead of pressing the advantage, they pause to loot the abandoned camps. By nightfall, Umma has regrouped and counterattacked, turning victory into stalemate. The aftermath is worse than the battle. Irrigation canals are destroyed, fields lie fallow, and disease spreads in the crowded, war-weary cities. The people whisper that the gods are angry, but in truth, it is human pride and mistrust that keeps Sumer divided. This endless cycle weakens them all. While the city-states pour their energy into fighting each other, outside powers begin to take notice. From the north, the Akkadians watch. From the east, the Elamites prepare their armies. The Sumerians do not yet realize it, but their disunity is a beacon to every ambitious conqueror within reach. Still, in the midst of this chaos, there are moments of brilliance. New siege techniques emerge from the constant need to overcome rival walls. Diplomacy evolves into an art form, with treaties and alliances as carefully crafted as any blade. Even the written word, first developed to track grain and taxes, is now used to record histories of battles and victories, preserving the glory of each city's deeds for generations to come. And yet, the narrator's voice grows somber as the chapter closes. In the land between the rivers, no victory lasts forever. The same sun that shines on Uruk today will shine on its conqueror tomorrow. And in the game of kings, there are no allies, only rivals who have not yet turned their spears toward you. But the Sumerians are not yet finished. Out of this fractured landscape will rise a dynasty that will, for a brief and brilliant moment, unite the cities under a single banner. This is the story of Ur III, the Golden Age, and the calm before the storm. If the wars of the city-states were the storm, then the rise of Ur the Thru was the rainbow after, brilliant, dazzling, but destined to fade. From the ashes of endless rivalries, one ruler managed to gather the scattered pieces of Sumer into a single, towering structure of power. It was, in many ways, the last great empire of the Sumerians, and for a time, it seemed unshakable. The city of Ur stood at the heart of this transformation. Its walls rose high above the desert plain, their baked bricks glowing a warm gold under the afternoon sun. Inside, life pulsed with the rhythm of order and prosperity. Merchants crowded the bazaars with goods from as far as the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Copper, tin, lapis lazuli, fine textiles dyed in colors that seemed stolen from the sunset. Farmers, no longer plagued by the raids of rival cities, tilled their fields in peace, their canals flowing with the carefully managed waters of the Euphrates. The king, Shulgi, presided not just as a warrior, but as an administrator, a patron of the arts, and a shrewd politician. Under his rule, the empire stretched its reach into surrounding territories, securing trade routes and enforcing laws that bound distant towns to the heart of Ur. If Gilgamesh had been the mythic hero of Uruk, Shulgi was the pragmatic builder of a real, enduring power. One of the crowning achievements of Ur the 30 was its system of taxation and law. For the first time, there was a standardized way to collect tribute and redistribute resources. Every farmer knew exactly what portion of their harvest went to the temples and the state. Every merchant paid predictable tariffs on their goods. Scribes recorded it all in meticulous cuneiform, not just numbers, but legal codes that ensured disputes were settled in an orderly way. It was a web of control so efficient that, for a moment, it seemed invincible. Roads were repaired, canals expanded, and storage facilities brimmed with grain in anticipation of bad harvests. Temples sponsored artisans who carved intricate reliefs of kings receiving the blessing of the gods. Musicians, poets, and craftsmen thrived, their works celebrating not just the divine, but the human achievement of a stable, organized society. In the language of Age of Empires, the Segu, this was the late game of the Sumerians. The economy was unmatched, resource generation at its peak, trade routes secure, technology advanced. The empire could produce siege engines and walls that were the envy of its neighbors. But with this prosperity came a subtle but dangerous shift. The army was no longer the lean, mobile force it once was. The soldiers were well equipped, yes, but the focus was on defense and ceremonial display rather than quick, decisive strikes. The very stability that fed the empire's economy had dulled its edge in war. Daily life in Ur reflected both the splendor and the fragility of this moment. In the morning, temple courtyards echoed with the chants of priests offering sacrifices. By midday, the markets roared with the bargaining of traders. At night, oil lamps flickered along the streets, illuminating murals that told the history of Sumer, a history now firmly under Ur's banner. It was a golden age, and the people believed it might last forever. But history has a way of whispering warnings. The more the empire expanded, the more it had to rely on local governors to enforce its laws. Some were loyal, others saw an opportunity for their own ambitions. Beyond the borders, rival powers stirred. The Elamites in the east, restless tribes to the west, and the shadow of the Akkadians never fully gone. Even nature conspired to test Ur's might. The carefully balanced irrigation system, so vital to the Sumerian way of life, depended on predictable river flows. When floods came too early or droughts lingered too long, grain reserves dwindled and tensions rose. One scene captures the contradiction of Ur-30 perfectly. In the central square of Ur, Shulgi stands before a crowd, unveiling a new law code. It is read aloud by a scribe, each clause promising fairness, order, and the favor of the gods. The people cheer, throwing flowers at the king's feet. But beyond the gates, a caravan arrives from the north. Carrying rumors, a tribe has raided a border outpost. A governor has refused to send his tribute. The scribes record the law, but the soldiers quietly sharpen their spears. In that moment, the truth becomes clear. Prosperity is never without a price. Every brick laid in peace is a brick someone else may one day try to tear down. Still, it would be wrong to see Ur-30 only as a prelude to collapse. For 2 generations, it stood as a beacon of what the Sumerians could achieve when united. The bureaucracy it built would inspire future kingdoms. The art, the literature, the urban planning, these would echo through the centuries. In their temples, the Sumerians prayed to the gods for eternal stability. And for a while, it seemed the gods had listened. But history is not kind to static empires. And as the wealth of Ur grew, so too did the eyes of those who coveted it. In the north, an old name began to rise again: Akkad. And where Ur had learned to build, Akkad had never forgotten how to conquer. Next, the story turns to chapter 7, the rise of the outsider, Akkadian, where the golden walls of Ur will meet the iron will of a new power. The Sumerians had built cities like jewels upon the plains, but beyond their walls, a different kind of power was gathering. Leaner, hungrier, and unbound by the slow machinery of bureaucracy. At its head was Sargon the Great, a man whose name would echo through history not as a dreamer, but as a conqueror. The Akkadians were not strangers to Sumer. They traded in its markets, served as mercenaries in its armies, and learned the ways of its scribes and artisans. But they were also a people forged in a harsher world, from the lands to the north where city walls were thinner, horses swifter, and survival demanded movement, not monuments. Sargon himself was a figure out of legend. Born of humble origins, abandoned as an infant, raised by a water drawer, yet destined to rule. His rise from servant to king was not by divine appointment, but by sheer will and relentless ambition. Where Sumer prized stability, Sargon thrived in change. Where Sumer relied on slow diplomacy, he favored the sudden strike. The campaign against Sumer began not with a thunderclap, but with a series of precise blows. Akkadian forces struck border towns, testing the response of the great cities. In Age of Empires, the second terms, it was like an opponent hitting you with early cavalry raids while you were still fortifying your walls and researching upgrades. The Sumerians, with their mighty infantry and siege engines, were powerful in set battles. But they were too slow to chase horsemen across open plains. When the Akkadians advanced in full, it was like a tide. Their cavalry thundered ahead, flanking and cutting off supply lines, while disciplined infantry followed to hold the ground. Messengers from Uruk, Lagash, and Ur shouted for unity, but old rivalries lingered. Some city-states fought bravely, others bargained for their own survival. The lack of a true, lasting alliance, the fatal weakness of Sumer since the days of Gilgamesh, now became the noose around their neck. The decisive moment came when the Akkadian army marched on Uruk, the jewel of the south. The Sumerians had faced sieges before, but never like this. Sargon's troops moved with a precision that stunned even the seasoned generals of Uruk. Towers were dismantled by siege engines, adapted from Sumerian designs, but made lighter and more mobile. Cavalry patrolled the plains, intercepting any attempt to send for reinforcements. From the high walls, citizens watched in silence as the dust cloud of the Akkadian host grew nearer, shimmering in the heat. Banners snapped in the wind, each bearing the black and gold emblem of Sargon. The sound came next, a deep, rhythmic beat of war drums, joined by the bray of long bronze horns that seemed to make the very stones tremble. Inside the city, the mood shifted from defiance to desperation. Archers lined the ramparts, their arrows ready. Merchants hid their treasures. Priests carried sacred relics into the inner sanctuaries. Somewhere in the distance, a child began to cry. When the Akkadians struck, it was not a single frontal assault, but a series of coordinated waves. While siege crews battered the gates, cavalry circled and harassed the defenders, forcing them to split their forces. Hours turned into a day, then another. Supplies dwindled. The defenders grew weary. On the morning of the third day, the great gates of Uruk shuddered and fell. The Akkadian vanguard poured through, their shields locked, their voices raised in a fierce, rolling chant. Behind them came the cavalry, cutting down any who resisted. At the city's heart, Sargon's banner was raised high over the ziggurat. The flag of Sumer, the symbol of its ancient pride, was pulled down. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It was not just a military defeat. It was the symbolic end of an age. The cities of Sumer, once the beating heart of civilization, had been absorbed into the Akkadian Empire. Their language would live on, their gods still worshipped, their scribes still writing in cuneiform. But the center of power had shifted. The age when Sumer led the world was over. In the logic of AoE 2, the match was lost not because the Sumerians had no strength, but because they played to their own strengths while ignoring their weaknesses. Against an opponent with superior mobility and unity, their slower, defense-heavy style was outmaneuvered. History remembers Sargon not just for his victories, but for reshaping the political map. For the first time, the cities of Mesopotamia were part of a single empire under one ruler. It was the dawn of a new chapter, one in which the Sumerians would no longer be the authors, but the subjects. As the sun set over Uruk that day, the streets lay quiet except for the distant sound of Akkadian horns announcing victory. Somewhere in the shadows, an old man whispered to a child about the days when Sumer's banners flew high and the rivers flowed only for them. The boy listened, eyes wide, perhaps not realizing he was hearing the last breath of a civilization's pride. The fall of Uruk to Sargon had marked the end of Sumer's golden age, but it was not yet the final curtain. For a brief moment, under Akkadian rule, the cities of Sumer still pulsed with life. Their temples active, their scribes at work, their markets still trading spices, copper, and lapis lazuli. But the center of gravity had shifted. When the Akkadian Empire itself weakened, it was as if the protective wall that had shielded Sumer from the storms beyond the horizon suddenly cracked. And from those cracks came new waves of invaders. The first to strike were the Elamites, a fierce people from the east. They swept across the plains with the precision of a practiced knife, targeting the richest cities and tearing at the very symbols of Sumerian pride. Temples that had stood for centuries, towering ziggurats, once crowned with gold and echoing with the chants of priests, were stripped, their sacred treasures carried away as trophies. The cries of the defeated mingled with the crackle of burning reed roofs. After them came the Amorites, a different kind of conqueror. They were not merely raiders. They came to settle, to plant their own roots in the fertile soil of Mesopotamia. But in doing so, they eroded what was left of the old Sumerian order. The once proud city-states became mere provinces under new kings, their laws rewritten, their gods merged with foreign pantheons. The land itself seemed to reflect the decay. Fields once lush with barley and wheat lay fallow, irrigation canals clogged with silt and weeds. The carefully maintained network of dikes and levees, the lifeblood of Sumerian agriculture, fell into neglect. Without constant upkeep, the rivers became unpredictable, flooding fields in one season and leaving them dry in the next. Merchants, who once boasted of Sumerian goods as the finest in the known world, now found their caravans carrying imports from newer, rising powers. The wheel that Sumer had given to the world now rolled for others. There were still moments of resistance, brave stands by those who refused to let the old ways die. In Ur, elders convened in shadowed chambers, speaking of rallying the cities once more. In Lagash, artisans carved in stone the names of kings long dead, as if preserving memory could preserve power. But these were embers against the tide. The age of Sumer was passing, and the world knew it. An age of empires, the Seku terms. It was as if the Sumerians had reached the imperial age first, dominating early and mid-game, but had failed to adapt as new civilizations with faster, more flexible armies emerged. Their technological lead had been spent, their strategies copied and improved upon by rivals. What they had invented became the weapons of their own undoing. The physical signs of the end were everywhere. Once grand processional ways where priests and kings had walked to the sound of lyres and drums, now lay cracked and overgrown with weeds. The white plaster on temple walls flaked away, revealing the bare mud brick beneath. Statues of gods and kings stood toppled in the dust, their features worn away by wind and neglect. In the silence of the night, the wind carried not the chants of worship, but the howl of jackals roaming the outskirts of abandoned villages. The darkness was not just the absence of light, it was the absence of memory. The slow erasure of a civilization from the stage of the living. And yet, even in their downfall, there was a strange grandeur. The Sumerians were not erased in a single cataclysm. They were absorbed into the great river of history they had helped to shape. Their cities became the foundations for others. Their gods lived on under different names. Their writing taught to new scribes who spoke in other tongues. In this way, they did not vanish. They transformed. The irony was sharp. Sumer had been the first, the blueprint from which others would build. They had pioneered agriculture, architecture, governance, and the written word. But being first also meant facing challenges no one else had faced. From organizing mass labor for irrigation to defending open plains without the benefit of mountain fortresses. Every innovation they created became a stepping stone for those who came after. And those successors learned not only from Sumer's triumphs, but also from its mistakes. By the time the last independent Sumerian city bowed to a foreign ruler, the people themselves likely no longer thought of themselves as Sumerians. They were simply citizens of a city, worshippers of their gods, tillers of their fields, identities shaped now by the empires that ruled over them. But in the clay tablets buried beneath their feet, the old stories remained, of kings who claimed to rule all the lands, of battles fought for honor and water, of the first cities under the sun. As the twilight deepened over the ruins of Ur and Uruk, a traveler could stand upon the crumbling walls and see the horizon stretch endlessly, just as it had for the first Sumerian settlers thousands of years before. The rivers still flowed, the stars still traced their ancient paths, but the voices that had once commanded the land were gone. The first civilization in history had taken its final bow, stepping quietly into the shadows, yet its shape remained imprinted upon the world it left behind. The Sumerians may have vanished as a political power, but their fingerprints remain etched into the bedrock of human civilization. They were the first to turn the scattered sparks of human settlement into the blaze of urban life. And those flames never truly went out. Imagine a cinematic montage. On one side of the frame, an ancient scribe bent over a damp clay tablet, carving wedge-shaped signs with a reed stylus. The camera pans. The clay tablet dissolves into a modern printed book, words and symbols flowing seamlessly across millennia. For it was the Sumerians who invented writing, the cuneiform script that would inspire every written system in Mesopotamia and beyond. Without it, there would be no recorded history, no laws preserved in stone, no poetry echoing from the dawn of time. Their laws, too, set the template for justice. Long before Hammurabi etched his famous code, Sumerian city-states had inscribed legal rules into clay, defining property rights, debt repayment, marriage, and crime. These were not vague oral traditions. They were codified, public, and intended to bind both the ruler and the ruled. Even the kings stood beneath the shadow of the law, a radical idea in a world where most rulers claimed divine immunity. In our cinematic montage, the chiseled laws on clay tablets fade into a modern courtroom, the judge's gavel echoing the same idea. That order is stronger than chaos when written rules guide a people. Architecturally, they were no less revolutionary. The towering ziggurats of Ur, Eridu, and Uruk were more than religious monuments. They were the spiritual and administrative hearts of their cities. Built from sun-dried mud brick and faced with fired brick, they rose above the flat plains like man-made mountains. These inspired later wonders, from Babylon's Itamananki to the stepped temples of faraway lands. In our visual sequence, the ziggurat morphs into a modern skyscraper, steel replacing mud brick, but the intent the same: to create a structure that declares, "Here is the center of our world." The Sumerians also laid the groundwork for organized religion. Their pantheon, gods of the sky, the earth, the rivers, and the underworld, would be adopted, adapted, and renamed by Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Concepts like the divine right of kings, temple economies, and priestly power began here, and still echo in the beliefs and governance of countless later societies. Even their technology traveled far beyond their time. The wheel, first used for pottery, was adapted to carts and chariots, transforming transportation and warfare. Their advanced irrigation systems enabled farming on a scale never before seen, feeding dense populations and supporting armies, artisans, and scholars. Time itself, the division into 60 minutes, 60 seconds, comes from Sumer's sexagesimal system. In our imagined montage, the spinning potter's wheel transforms into the whirling axle of a modern car, and then into the ticking hands of a clock. All born from the same intellectual leap thousands of years ago. In Age of Empires, the two terms, the Sumerians may not dominate the meta in multiplayer battles. Their units aren't the fastest cavalry or the deadliest archers. Yet, like their real-world counterparts, they bring durability and resilience. Their long-lasting resources, strong siege, and reliable infantry mirror the historical truth. The Sumerians were builders of foundations. Others might win the game's final battle, but they are fighting on a map drawn by Sumer. What makes their legacy so enduring is that it was absorbed by the empires that replaced them. Babylon did not erase Sumer. It stood on its shoulders. Assyria marched to war using strategies born in Sumerian city-states. Even the Persian Empire, vast and multi-ethnic, inherited bureaucratic and infrastructural ideas that began in the reed-filled marshes of southern Mesopotamia. Modern historians often call Sumer the first civilization, but this title does not mean they were the most powerful or the longest-lived. It means they were the first to show humanity what a civilization could be, to prove that the chaos of tribes and villages could be organized into cities, laws, and shared culture. The final shot of our imagined film would not be the ruins of Ur, silent under the desert sun. Instead, it would be a montage of the living world. A student opening a textbook, a judge reading a law, a city skyline glowing at night. And somewhere in that glow, unseen but unmistakable, is the light first kindled in the temples and streets of Sumer. Their armies are gone, their cities are dust, but their ideas march on, undefeated, immortal, and woven into the everyday life of billions. Long after their cities turn to dust, the Sumerians live on, not in armies or monuments, but in stories and games. They stride across the boundaries of time, existing both in the yellowed clay tablets of archaeologists and in the glowing screens of modern players. In ancient myth, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, still roams. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, carries us into a world where kings are half god, where friendship shapes the fate of nations, and where the search for immortality becomes a journey into the meaning of life itself. In its verses, we hear echoes of real battles fought between city-states, of real rulers whose names and deeds were immortalized in clay. Our cinematic lens lingers on the walls of Uruk as Gilgamesh walks them, surveying his city. A reminder that once, these streets rang with the footsteps of a king whose legend would outlive his people. Thousands of years later, the Sumerians reappear, this time not in epic poetry, but in strategy games. In Age of Empires this too, they are a playable civilization. Sturdy villagers, powerful siege weapons, strong defensive capabilities. They may lack swift cavalry, but they can grind an opponent down with resilience and steady pressure. Their in-game strengths mirror their real-world history. A civilization built on endurance, resourcefulness, and the slow, deliberate shaping of destiny. For gamers, the Sumerians become more than a name in a textbook. They are an army to command, a strategy to master. Every click to train a villager, every decision to fortify a wall or build a siege workshop is a faint echo of the choices made by Sumerian rulers thousands of years ago. This blending of myth and play creates something unique, a way for modern people to engage with ancient history not just as passive learners, but as participants. You can send Sumerian troops to battle, defend their cities, expand their borders, even rewrite their fate. In the game, Uruk might never fall to Kish. The Akkadian cavalry might be repelled at the gates. The what-ifs of history can play out in the safety of simulation. Yet, beneath the fun of the game lies a deeper current. The real Sumerians could not reload a save file. Their defeats were final, their victories fragile. Every triumph was won with sweat and risk. Every city built in the shadow of floods, droughts, and war. And when their time ended, there was no second chance. Only the hope that their ideas would survive. The emotional weight of this contrast is the heart of our closing sequence. On the screen, in AoE 2, a Sumerian trebuchet fires against the walls of an enemy city. Cut to the ruins of Ur, silent under a sky that has watched empires rise and fall. Cut again to a modern classroom where students read about the first civilization. The transitions blur the lines between pixels, stone, and memory. The Sumerians teach us that no civilization is immortal, but ideas can be. They were the first to map the boundaries of law, architecture, religion, and governance. In doing so, they lit the torch that countless others carried forward. When we play as them in a game, when we read their myths, when we trace our clocks and calendars back to their mathematics, we are carrying that torch, whether we realize it or not. And so, we end with a question, both cinematic and personal. They built the first civilization. What will we leave for the future? Will our cities, our laws, our culture stand the test of time? Or will they too become relics for another age to rediscover? The camera pulls back from the ruins of Uruk, the desert stretching endlessly around them. In the distance, the faint hum of a modern city rises. Traffic, voices, the pulse of life. Somewhere in that hum is the heartbeat of Sumer, still alive after 5,000 years. From the very first bricks of Uruk to the echoes of Gilgamesh's epic, the Sumerians lit the first torch of civilization. That flame still burns, and together, we can keep it alive. If this story moved you, help us carry it forward. Like, share, and subscribe so we can keep unearthing the tales of humanity's greatest chapters. History lives only if we choose to tell it.